Thank you and welcome. It is lovely to see so many old friends and people I know. Equally lovely to see so many new faces that I don't. Part of what is so special about this conference, and it's great to see so many people out on a hot summer day who care about green building and making our world better, is because of our passion for this. We are a community that is bound to each other by this common goal. So thank you for being here. Here at NYU, we are working to do the right thing. We're LEED certifying our buildings. We're building passive house buildings. We're looking at indoor air quality. We're starting to account for and track and hope to reduce our Scope 3 emissions. We're doing all these things, but even more apropos as an educational institution, I think is why there couldn't be a more appropriate place for this conference, where people come to learn, to discuss, to converse, and to grow in their careers and in this movement about green building. Every year I come here and learn something that I use all year, and I'm able to refer back to contacts I make, facts, figures, people. It's an absolutely immense opportunity. So grateful to Urban Green for coming back to us every year. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce John Mandyck, CEO of Urban Green Council.
Thank you, Cecil. Thank you, Cecil, and welcome everybody to our annual conference. We're so thrilled that you're here today. You know, last year when we met at this time, it was in a haze of orange air. If you were here, you'll remember that. Thankfully, today is clearer, but the need to decarbonize is no less. And so that's what we think about each and every day at Urban Green, is how we can decarbonize our buildings for healthy and resilient communities. And I know you do the same thing, and that's why we bring you the conference today, which is New York City Next, the trends that you need to know for sustainability that are shaping our city. We're going to dive into 3 trends today. We're going to dive into the first trend on AI for construction. Secondly, we're going to look at hot water heat pumps as a way to jumpstart electrification. And then we're going to round out on the importance of embodied carbon. We have an all-star lineup of speakers and moderators, and so I'm really excited for the discussion this afternoon. You know, events like this don't happen without generous sponsors, and we have several that have made today possible. The first is Carrier Corporation. They are our lead presenting sponsor. Let's give Carrier a big round of applause. I want to thank Carrier for their longstanding commitment to Urban Green, to this conference, and the global green building movement. We also want to thank NYU and Cecil for being our host sponsor. Cecil, thank you very much. We're in the house of Cecil and NYU. And you'll hear about this later. We have 2 great reception sponsors that are going to make our reception possible at the end of our conference today, and that's Ice Air and Local 94 building operating engineers. Let's thank them too. Okay, quick bit of housekeeping. If you were here in 2019, you might remember the fire alarm. It was very exciting. If there is a fire alarm, we will stay put and wait for instructions from NYU on what to do next. And so with that, let's get started with our keynote chat. I want to invite up Elijah Hutchinson. Give Elijah a big round of applause. Elijah was appointed by Mayor Adams last year as the Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice. MOCJ, it leads the city's efforts to ensure that we are reducing emissions and preparing our city to adapt and protect New Yorkers from the intensifying impacts of climate change. Prior to this really important role, Elijah was Vice President of Waterfronts for the New York City Economic Development Corporation, where he launched the Lower Manhattan Coastal Resiliency Project. Say hello to Elijah.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, that's really great. So let's start right into it. You lead MOCEJ. Tell us about the priorities you have for the office in your work this year.
Sure. The Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice is a new climate and environmental justice office within this administration. We're the first mayor's office to have environmental justice within our title. And really what that's showing is a shift from setting the targets and the policies to making sure we operationalize and center equity, environmental justice in our programs and policies going forward. We've just marked a year since we released Plan YC with Earth Day happening this past April. And we had two really exciting things that have happened since the beginning of this administration. One is the City Council passing the City of Yes for carbon neutrality, which will enable property owners and give them more flexibility to be able to introduce new energy efficiency measures, introduce new technologies into their property and decarbonize even quicker, enabling solar storage and other measures that we absolutely need all private property owners to do. And we've also extended the solar and storage top property tax abatement, which was really important and critical because what we hear from everyone is they need the resources to be able to comply. This past month, we just also released the Environmental Justice NYC report, which was a landmark, really first of its kind, documentation defining disadvantaged communities in New York City for the first time, and really laying out by each community what the benefits and burdens of environmental consequences have been, historically speaking. And what that does for us is it allows us to do this next phase of planning, which we'll be doing throughout the year, which is to set up the policies and programs to target those environmental justice communities to make sure that we can also bring them along in this energy transition, which is really critical. For the first time ever, what that tool does is create an online accessible database and mapping tool. So if you go to EJ NYC, you'll see a map of New York City with over 100 different data layers that anyone can access that has everything from what are the flood hazards and flood risks that I can expect from coastal storm surge, but then also where are the garbage cans in my neighborhood? Where's the bus stop? Where are these cooling centers that I hear of but I don't know how to get to? Where are the community gardens? Really tying together all of the environmental issues together into one resource and putting that in the hands of community members so that they have access to that information and data. And it also includes, for the first time, something called the Flood Vulnerability Index. So now we know we have a heat vulnerability index for the city. We also now have a flood vulnerability index that takes into account not just coastal flooding, but all types of different hazards, flooding hazards that may happen in the neighborhood, and look at the relative differences between communities so that you know what types of hazards might I be experiencing due to climate change, looking at now through 2100, so that now you can go online and see an entirely new map of New York City of what your lived experience might be like in 2050, in 2080, and 2100, and that allows people to have that information, which is a really, really, really powerful tool for us.
Excellent. You mentioned Plan YC, and your office is responsible for implementing that. Maybe you can help brief the audience on, first of all, what is Plan YC?
Sure.
And maybe what are the couple steps that are important that you think you'll be taking this year or in the near future with it?
Yeah, there are a lot of things in Plan YC. It's the city's climate plan, and New York's one of those weird places where we don't have a master plan. Right? There's no one document that tells everybody what we're supposed to be doing. So Plan YC is a really important document for us that our office leads that sets up the framework for where we're going into the future. And so it's really exciting to be able to think about the vision of New York in the future as we adapt to climate change. But also Plan YC identifies over 100 different initiatives and steps we can take to get to that future. There are a couple of things definitely want to pull out that are key priorities for us. One, if you're in New York City, you may be familiar with the Clean Construction Executive Order 23 that we have. We're looking at expanding that even further to include embodied carbon, which we know is something that we really need to take accounting for within our emissions profile so that we know we're actually achieving those energy savings. And so we're building off of that, those executive orders. We're also looking at focusing on several policies to think about indoor cooling and maximizing opportunity for indoor cooling as well, which includes developing a policy for maximum summer indoor temperature, similar to how building owners are required to keep a building cool warm during the winter. It will be required to also make sure that temperatures inside of properties don't get elevated to a point where it's an unhealthy, unlivable environment. And that's really important from an environmental justice perspective, because heat is a huge killer of New Yorkers. Black New Yorkers are twice as likely to die from heat-related illnesses than white New Yorkers. And that's a lot of times due because there isn't access to indoor cooling, or electricity itself is expensive. And so we're also advocating for the HEAT program to be modified, to be funded further, to include utility assistance for cooling as well. And then to think about all the cooling technologies that we have, and making sure that we can integrate those into projects. Heat pumps, and working with NYCHA on their heat pumps as well, on their heat, I forget, their heat pumps for all challenge, I think it is. But then we also need to think about cooling on the outside, because temperatures on the inside are bad. Temperatures on the outside, as we know, are hitting record levels. And last year was a record hot year for New York City. We expect this trend to continue. So trees are going to be really important for New York. We've had a record-breaking year of planting the most trees with our Parks Department than we've ever done before. And now we're thinking about, for those areas that are environmental justice communities, for instance, how do we make sure we get trees into those areas so that we can cover 30% of New York City in trees, which is one of our Plan YC objectives. And there are some other ones I'll get to too.
Great. Well, if the audience doesn't see it, I encourage you to check out Plan YC. Urban Green was on the committee for it. We stood next to the mayor, stood with the mayor when it was released last year, and it's a really impressive document with a lot of cool initiatives like embodied carbon we're going to talk about today, maximum indoor temperature. I think we'll be hearing more about that going forward. I'm going to make you the most powerful person in the room, and I'm going to give you a magic wand. And if you could wave it, what is the one barrier you would try to remove to do your work?
So I was just outside and walking around. I overheard just several conversations, and over just the few minutes that I was out there, I heard a couple of people say, nobody knows about Local Law 97. What are people doing? I heard someone said just they never heard of it, and that has to change. We can't be in this space where people aren't aware of what is our landmark climate regulation. New York City is largely efficient in a lot of other ways, but 70% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from our building stock. And so if we're going to have any climate policy at all and any success in the future of tackling climate change, we have to tackle our buildings. And so it's really important that we have those mandates, but then also making sure we have those resources, which is why we released Getting 97 Done, which is the city's mobilization strategy to making sure people have awareness and the resources to comply with Local Law 97. But there needs to be this really ground shift of understanding of all of the requirements that are needed, buy-in from people about what it takes to get there, political alignment on the resources and the policies necessary to get there. And so if I could wave a magic wand, I would love to be in a place where we're further along in those conversations. Already we see since 2019, people are complying with Local Law 97 through some of the most basic energy efficiency measures. That non-compliance has dropped from 20% down to 10% already within the last few years, which is really encouraging and showing us that people are finding pathways to decarbonize and to meet their targets, which is really, really encouraging. But I was just meeting with some of the ambassadors from Sweden and other places, and there are places that are net zero today. And it's really encouraging to see that this is achievable and that there are other worlds in which this exists, and that it is possible. It's just getting there, and how we get there, that's the real challenging part.
So part of how we get there, there's this whole slew of money coming from the federal government with the IRA. It's starting to flow actively to the states, into cities, into communities, into organizations. What role do you see the IRA funds helping to advance the city's climate programs?
Sure. New York City is already submitted more than $3 billion in competitive applications in grants to the federal government to be able to fund in these initiatives. And so far, we've received $650 million in awards, which is really encouraging. And we can see the federal government really trying to work with us in getting those resources to us as quickly as possible, understanding changes in administration in the future, knowing we need to do everything as fast as we can. One example of how we've been able to use those funds is to even just like target our electric school bus fleet and electrify school buses, create a charging hub at Hunts Point, which is one of our environmental justice communities that will service over 7,000 electric vehicles a year. Part of that funding also includes training for those that need to understand how to repair an electric school bus versus a regular school bus, and making sure we have those skills training in place for workers to be able to also adapt, because this is a huge shift on the workforce side as well. And what we're seeing is that the green economy is going to increasingly play a huge role within New York City's economy, accounting for a significant part of our GDP and employment of up to 400,000 jobs in the coming years. And so now it's tying those grant resources and those workforce development opportunities into the program so that they're all really speaking to one another and fully taking advantage of as many federal resources as we can to get there.
Great. 650 million, I like the sound of that, but I like the sound of 3 billion better, so let's see if we can bring that in. You talked about NYC in your opening. What are some of the other initiatives you're doing to advance environmental justice in the city?
Sure, and environmental justice in New York is complicated by the fact that the resources that we've gotten to adapt communities isn't always something that we decide on as a city. The state and federal government, after Sandy, really allocated a lot of resources to those neighborhoods in New York City that were immediately impacted by Sandy, and for specific climate hazards that we experienced during Sandy. And now we know that you have to think multi-hazard, you have to be ready to spend that money before the disaster happens, and you need to do all of that planning on resilience and decarbonization and integrate that together so that your sustainability and your resilience objectives are really speaking to one another. We've started a new program called Climate Strong Communities, which is working with neighborhoods that didn't receive resources, and before they've received any resources really, to start to scope out individual adaptation projects that we then work with them to apply for funding to actually build out. And so it's really turned climate adaptation planning on its head for New York City, where we're not waiting for those funds to come or the disaster to come, but really starting to speak with people who sometimes need a very basic understanding of what it is we're trying to talk about and what it is trying to achieve. And in other times, a lot of the communities are very sophisticated about climate change and know that there's lots of risks, but need some kind of guidance and perspective from like, what is the government doing? What should I be doing? And then us working together to identify projects and opportunities with city agencies at the table so that we know what we can do ahead of time is a really winning solution for us. And so we're working on developing an entire pipeline of projects and initiatives to build out our Climate Strong Communities program, and then also taking advantage of the EPA funding, like community change grants, for instance, which represent a historic level of investment in environmental justice and climate in neighborhoods for projects that don't even require city sponsorship. Anyone can apply to these funds. And so we're kind of traffic copping right now all of the different organizations, people who are interested in seeing adaptations projects happen in their community, trying to find partnership opportunities, sharing data through things like the EJ mapping tool so that it can strengthen their grant application and help them identify, what should we be prioritizing and focused on if we're going to try to solve, take off a piece of this really big climate adaptation challenge that we're all facing.
Great. Well, Elijah, you're sitting in a room of building decarbonization leaders who are very committed to the movement. What advice or call to action do you have for everybody here?
We really need people to plan in advance, and that's not like a, that's maybe stating the obvious, but we're trying to get to we're in the first compliance period for Local Law 97 right now. By 2030, the need for partial electrification is there, but then we have 2050, which is net zero. And so we have the policies in place that articulate what the requirements are to be in compliance with the program. I'm nervous that people are going to just budget fees because it's maybe perceived as the easiest thing to do. But it's what we really want is the carbon coming out of these projects. We don't want the fees coming out of the penalties. We need people to decarbonize because Local Law 97 has the possibility of reducing over 150 hospitalization. Wait, I have this stat, and this is an important one. But Local Law 97 is projected to take out 6 million tons of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, but avoid 150 hospitalizations a year. But we're also showing it could prevent up to 50 to 130 premature deaths. And so we want people to plan in advance for that carbon neutral future and to really start thinking about those deep energy retrofits that get us through 2030, knowing that some of the measures that building owners can take now are some of the lower hanging fruit and it's easier to comply, but you have to think about the life cycle of your equipment, the planned capital improvements that you're doing for your institutional properties, your marketing materials for your building, and really align that all with the CLCPA objectives that we have and Local Law 97 so that we know we're actually making the right investments.
Great. Well, everybody, Elijah Hutchinson.
Thank you.
Thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you. Appreciate it.